China vows to fight till the end as President Donald Trump hits China with additional 50% tariffs. In 30 minutes, approximately, Trump's additional 50% tariffs on top of the 34 he announced on all Chinese goods will take effect, taking the overall tariff rate against Chinese imports to 104%. Now, in response to earlier U.S. tariffs announced last week, China retaliated with its own set of measures, including 34% on all U.S. exports to China, also rare earth export controls and market stability actions. Now, the country has also deployed its economic heavyweights, such as the central banks, such as sovereign wealth funds and financial regulators, into the fray to keep the market stable. So, come in the tariffs on the United States, and a day earlier than China's tariffs kick in. What will happen? What other tools does China have up its sleeves, and how will China respond to Trump's latest escalation? And what chances are there now of a negotiated settlement? Welcome to this live edition of The Point with me, Li Xin, coming to you from Beijing. I'm pleased to be joined here in the studio by Victor Gao, Chair Professor at Soochow University; from Bangkok by Carl Fei, Professor of Strategy at BI Norwegian Business School in Oslo; and from Brisbane by Warwick Powell, Adjunct Professor at Queensland University of Technology. Gentlemen, welcome to the show. So let's first take a look at market reaction here in China. We are now about 11:40 in the morning, and market opened considerably low. It really took a nosedive, but then at this moment what I'm looking at is actually markets are for the time being in positive territory. Victor, tell us about the kind of messages, or what are you reading from the relative calm in the Chinese market? What forces are in play here? How are investors feeling about the American tariffs that will kick in less than half an hour?
First of all, what the United States government under President Trump is doing against China in terms of the maximum amount of tariff is unprecedented, and I think it breaks record in recent decades. And I think the Chinese government has decided to stand firm to defend its legitimate interests, and had already announced the proportional mirror image tariff of 34%. And I think the Chinese nation, all the Chinese corporates, are fully supportive of this decision. Now, the US government has announced additional 50% additional tariff against China. Now we are waiting to see what the Chinese government will decide to do. My personal view is that the Chinese government will announce very soon the proportional 50% additional tariff against the US export to China. What does that mean? That means between China and the United States, trade basically or literally will come to a halt. Now, this will be very damaging to Chinese businesses, of course, but it will be more damaging to the fundamental interest of the consumers in the United States. It will really damage the living standards of many innocent people in the United States. It shows that the maximum amount of tariff the US government is levying, not only against China, but against so many other countries in the world, are wrong, are not constructive, and they are not realizing the goal of moving back manufacturing jobs to the United States. So I think the Chinese society as a whole is supportive of the Chinese decision, and we are fully prepared to work closely with all entities to stabilize the situation and to make sure that the Chinese people do not suffer.
All right. Carl, what is your take on the relative calm, at least, on the surface here on the Chinese stock markets? And do you think within the next day we're going to hear announcement from China in reaction to the 50% additional tariffs that Trump just announced a day before?
Well, it's worth noting that, of course, this didn't just come out today, but people have sort of known about this for a few days. So I think the market has partially already priced this in. But I anticipate markets will actually react more negatively over the coming days. as this is really unprecedented and unfortunate.
But the Chinese market actually performed better than the US market. For instance, you know, there have been a couple of days of steep losses, whereas here, if you look at it, the first day, of course, it was bloodbath, but then the second day, I would say Wednesday, markets pretty much recovered some of the earlier losses. Today, it dropped in open trading, but then now it's almost in positive territory. What is that telling you about what's different here in China?
Well, you know, potentially people are hoping that they can substitute to other countries, not only having their trade with the U.S. And in fact, if you look over the last 20 years, China has radically decreased the percentage of their exports that are going to the U.S. Maybe it's about only 1/5 of what it was before. So the U.S. is still an important trading partner, very important, but not as important as it was before. I think also it's important to note that one of the key things, and when we think about the Chinese economy, is actually persuading the Chinese consumers that they could save less and spend more. It's sort of, can you show that you should be confident in the economy? And I think the Chinese government is trying to send a message of confidence that they will be able to deal with this. The Chinese people have a higher savings rate than most countries around the world, so this is something that can adjust some. But I mean, the key point to keep in mind is that these tariffs are just unprecedented. This is really substantial. It's against what the U.S. has historically done.
But we've also seen a lot of major measures coming out by the central government here in Beijing. Warwick, for instance, as I mentioned, China's financial heavyweights, the People's Bank of China, which is China's central bank, Central Huijin Investment, which is like China's sovereign fund, and the National Financial Regulatory Administration have all stepped up after Trump's disastrous announcement to stabilize the markets. Do you think they have been effective in pretty much keeping things calm, giving people that sense of stability that they desperately need at this moment?
So far, so good, Liu Xin. Is
Warwick,
that Carl
please.
or me? Look, so far so good, and I think it's important to bear in mind that the structure of the market in China is quite different from the markets in the United States, for example. In China, the movements in pricing is usually driven by the speculative trading of small volume mum and dad shareholders, whereas by and large, the stocks on the Chinese market are held by institutions in a very much a purchase and hold kind of pattern. And when you get the major institutions coming in to lay a floor under the market, it's quite clear that the mums and dads have had their concerns allayed, and this reverts back to the kind of institutionally dominated market that we have in China. So the market is very different in the Chinese context. It also plays a much smaller role in the economy as a whole. So whilst the Western observers are usually obsessed with the red lines and the green lines of stock exchanges, most of the capital for companies to expand and develop in China actually still comes from bank lending, not from public listings at all. So I think the institutions, government institutions, have done what they've had to do for now. They've put a floor under the market and stabilised expectations.
Do you think China is going to act a tit for tat again against the 50% additional tariff?
Well, Victor probably knows better, and he's already suggested that, in fact, that's going to happen. So if that is the case, and China has certainly made it clear that it won't back down, so to speak, and it will match the Americans in terms of the measures that they're taking. So I think it's fair to say that there's a very high probability that whatever the Americans do in terms of tariff levels, China will do the same.
Well, China has indeed by now not blinked. China is ready to fight till the end if the United States is bent on waging a tariff war or trade war. That's according to Chinese Foreign Ministry on April the 8th. So, Victor, does that stand out to you as to how firm China is standing this time? What makes China so unfazed this time?
Absolutely. I think in this round of maximum trade war launched by the United States, China will not blink. And who blinks first will be known very soon in the coming weeks. And if you see all this maximum amount of panic buying in U.S. department stores, mommy and dad desperate to snatch imported goods before the tariffs kicked in, for example, and comparing the huge stability in the Chinese market for consumers, you will see China is not panicking. Lots of people in the United States are panicking because they worry about their living standards being severely eroded by such high tariffs. And I think the Chinese society is highly united and the government is very effective, very efficient. And I think once the government makes the decision, the people follow in that direction. So I think comparing the situation in the United States and China, I think China has all the confidence that in this round of maximum trade war, China will survive.
Carl, can you give us your take here? Because the bet on the White House, on part of the White House, seems to be that China cannot afford it, that China depends on the United States for its economy. If the United States start imposing the tariff, the Chinese economy is going to collapse. That seems to have been the logic before they make this policy. Clearly, it seems not the case. Can the Chinese economy really afford it? What are some of the numbers you could cite if you agree with this assessment?
So a couple things. First of all, I'd like to point out that, it's horrible for the U.S. and it's horrible for China. And I'm not sure the discussion of which country it's worse for is particularly useful. It's going to be painful for both, I believe. So this is, what I call a lose-lose-lose scenario. It's a lose for China, it's a lose for the U.S., it's a lose for the rest of the world because the world's very integrated in general. But more specifically, I do agree that China is maybe going to weather this a little bit better than what some people think. In terms of their reaction, I think that we may see this reciprocal 50% tariff imposed by China, or we might see China take another stance, which is instead to try to focus more on certain products and industries and maybe preventing those or putting really super high tariffs on those, such as the stances they've already started to do in rare earth, stances they've done in poultry, maybe expanding to all the industry rather than just a few companies that they suggest have been having chemicals in them. And maybe they would, for example, also take action against the U.S. Soybean industry, which is a very important import. In terms of how this may, sort of hurt U.S. or China, it's important to note that you can't just change the way the world is integrated in a second, even if this happens. And at the moment, about 67% of global manufacturing is happening in China. You can't, in a few days, all of a sudden just move that to other places. And so I think one of the unfortunate things, and I'll end after this, is that I think that the U.S. and China have a little bit been misreading each other. So, for example, for Trump to give such a short notice of just a few days to impose this 50% additional tariff, I mean, anyone who understands the way China works and acts, and for that matter, probably any country, if it was not China, has to understand that it's not reasonable for China to sort of back down or react in such a short period of time, because China needs to show that they're going to stand up for other things in the future.
Yeah, well, you mentioned a very important point. The way how the message was sent, it was a threat and it was an ultimatum. By this particular time, if you don't do this, we're going to do it. That is simply not the way to talk to anybody, let alone a very big country which has always stressed that it's going to be respected. Warwick, what is your take on it? Is there any way that China could have reacted to this, even if it is not the best way to go tit for tat here?
Well, I think China's response has actually been incredibly measured compared to the shrill, aggressive language and the posturing and the finger pointing that has come from Washington. The way that China's responded has been very, very calm. They've just announced the measures that it's going to take. They've explained to the world that it is not going to put up with being bullied. And they've also articulated, I think, very clearly that the United States is acting unilaterally in contravention of World Trade Organization rules and ultimately is undermining the multilateral trading environment that the world, not just America, has actually acted in good faith to the benefit of all. So that's the first thing. But the other issue, and this is the point about leverage, and to quote Donald Trump, who's got the cards, the fact of the matter is that China can diversify away from America, whereas America can't diversify away from China at anywhere near the pace that China can. And over the last 15 years, China's exports to the United States have reduced as a proportion of total exports. It's sitting at about 14% now. Trade with the United States represents about 3% of China's GDP, and the trade surplus that China has with the United States represents about 1.58% of GDP. Put plainly, the Americans don't have any cards to play, they've got no leverage in relation to China, and China can literally weather this out. Yes, it is a lose-lose. The issue, though, isn't that there's an equivalence. There is actually something that is quite different. There is no equivalence in this. The American consumers, the American importers, American small businesses are going to lose quicker and harder than anyone else as a result of these decisions. There's no turning back, though, for a narcissist. And frankly, Donald Trump's behaviour is that of a narcissist. And the American people are going to have to pass their own judgment on the actions of this current president.
They're not backing down, right? Looking at the markets tumbling, they're like, this is going to be better. In the long run, this is going to fight. I mean, it seems that you cannot bring sense into people who are just hell-bent on saying they're right, and they're right about everything all the time. Victor, you wanted to say something here.
Yes, I think I agree with the previous two panelists describing this whole situation as a lose-lose situation. However, allow me to emphasize one point. I think, first of all, the United States is doing the wrong thing to launch such a massive trade war against the rest of the world, including China. And China is doing the right thing. Why? Because China is promoting global trade. China is fighting for free trade. China is fighting for rules of the WTO to be respected, whereas the United States is completely turning everything upside down. It is using the tariff war as an instrument against so many countries, all European countries, for example. Amazing. All EU member states are targeted. And I think at such moment, it is up to every country to really stand up to defend your own legitimate interest rather than kowtow to the United States. Because the way Washington works now is that if you give in 1 inch, they will demand a foot. If you give in 1 foot, they will demand a kilometer. So there will be no end of such maximum bullying against all the others. EU already said they want to reduce tariff to zero for the manufactured goods exported to the United States. And the Trump administration says this is not sufficient. You need to compensate the United States for all the money you ripped off from the United States. Who ripped off whom? So someone is really turning the whole world upside down. It's confounding white and black. And I think what China is doing in this whole mist is doing the right thing. Bring clarity, bring stability, bring predictability and certainty to this sea of uncertainty and the chaos launched by the United States.
Yeah, actually there was a phone call between Chinese Premier Li Qiang and European Commission President Ursula von der Leyen just on Tuesday, and the two actually sent out very important messages. For instance, while the Chinese premier noted that the United States has announced indiscriminate tariffs on all its trading partners, including China and the EU, under various pretexts. This, which is typical case of unilateralism, protectionism, and economic bully, and that measures taken by China are not only to safeguard its own sovereignty, security, and development interests, but also to defend international trade rules and international fairness and justice. Von der Leyen said that the tariffs imposed by the United States have severely impacted international trade, causing a serious impact on Europe, China, and vulnerable countries. She said the EU and China are committed to upholding the fair and free multilateral trading system with the WTO at its core and safeguarding the sound and steady development of global economic and trade relations. Actually, if you read the latest news, the EU is set to announce possible tariffs on U.S. imports, especially on agricultural products such as soybean and some other agricultural products. And this is supposedly coming out in the days ahead. Carl, how do you look at the actual impact of these tariffs? It seems they have pushed China and EU together in defending the international trade rules.
Yeah, I think one thing that we're going to see out of this, let's suppose that tomorrow the tariffs go away. Unfortunately, I'm afraid that the U.S. sort of reputation will be hurt for quite a long time into the future, and we're going to see a growing multipolar world. And this is probably good that we have, an increasing number of strong powers to have more of a check and balance system. The other thing I would say is that I do think that China is in a good position to have a negotiation with the U.S. And while it probably isn't going to happen significantly today or tomorrow, maybe before too long something could happen and we could end up where we have, really even lower tariffs than what we had. This is my only hope, because Trump does really like to negotiate, and some countries don't have really the strength to negotiate with the U.S. I think China does. And so we could hope that that could be something positive that comes out of this, but I'm not very optimistic that this happens immediately, especially because if you look at Trump, he has for the last 20 years been talking about how he thinks tariffs are a really great thing against the advice of most economists.
Warwick, how do you look at the possibility or the scenario that basically that's the picture the White House is painting, right? World's government are rushing to negotiate with the White House to have the tariffs reduced or lowered. There are talks about 50 or 70 countries which have already offered to negotiate with the United States. Who knows how many countries actually have made that offer? We just won't know. But do you see that to be the scenario going ahead according to White House playbook?
Well, let's say that it's true, and I've serious doubts about that because this particular White House has a history of hyperbole when it comes to these sorts of things. But the reality is that the kinds of countries that may be contemplating at least bilateral discussions, let alone concessions, will be relatively small ones. And the effects of that will be negligible in terms of the United States objectives, which goes to the balance of trade. But it will actually create an opportunity around the world for increased regulatory arbitrage, where manufacturers in particular will look for these low tariff loopholes and continue to exploit them, further exacerbating the American balance of trade deficit. So none of this is actually going to help the United States. The United States problem isn't trade. Trade is a symptom of a much deeper set of problems that have been occasioned over 50 plus years of structural transformations in the American economy. And you don't deal with the real problems by band-aiding over the symptoms. So frankly, they can pursue these bilateral discussions with the smaller parties around the world. They can bully them as much as they want, but it actually won't deliver on the outcomes that the United States actually seeks to achieve.
Well, ostensibly, the outcome is to bring manufacturing jobs back to the United States. Do you see that as can be achieved if it is the real purpose of these policies? Warwick, once again.
No, well, not by having bilateral negotiations with relatively small, poor countries that don't do a lot of manufacturing to start with. Many of the countries that have been hit by these tariffs are actually developing countries, and there are large trade deficits that the United States has with them for a very simple reason. These countries export raw materials to the United States, but they're relatively poor. They're low income and can't afford the things that the United States makes. That's why there's a trade deficit. The fact that we go to zero tariffs won't make 1 ounce of difference in terms of the direction of the trade balance. The issue of rejuvenating American manufacturing is a complex one, but basically the American system needs to downgrade the importance of Wall Street, transfer capital allocations that go into the financial sector into the development of real industry, import substantial amounts of capital goods and intermediate goods, train a workforce that's capable of working in manufacturing that is suited for the 21st century, and rebuild American infrastructure in terms of transport systems, energy systems, and data systems that can support the modern manufacturing requirements that actually contemporary industry needs. Until all of that's done, all this stuff, all this huffing and puffing on trade and tariffs won't deliver to the American working population.
Yeah. Well, Victor, do you agree with that, and that the American population is given, at least those who follow President Trump, is being fed the comfort pill, let's say, that this is good for you, this is going to help you, just hanging there for a while, be courageous and be patient. Is that going to work at all? I mean, how are people going to wake up and say enough is enough?
I think it's not going to work. I think no one within the inner circle of President Trump's administration is telling the truth to the American people. The tariffs, amazingly, are not paid by China or all the other countries against whom the United States is levying such a huge amount of tariffs. The tariffs are paid by the American people, especially the American consumers. Literally, the tariff is a new tax against the American people. The money comes out of the pocket of the American people. It will destroy, bring down the living standards of the American people, especially those working class people in the United States. Now, if the United States is really serious about recreating manufacturing jobs in the United States, which is maybe a worthwhile goal, then let me tell them, you need to improve the environment for doing business, you need to build up your connectivity, you need to improve and increase your power supply, you need to train your workers, etc. There are so many things.
And the workers will have to be able to work for less.
Disciplined, yes. There are so many things you need to do, and relying on tariff alone will never bring manufacturing jobs back to the United States in the real sense of the word.
But there we are, there we are. In this day and age, this leader is elected in the United States and people around the world are being affected. I mean, lots of people have lost their money. For instance, on the stock market, people who never voted for Donald Trump. How can there be sense in the policy making in the White House? Are we just going to buckle up and sit through the next 2 years, Carl, until something happens in midterm, maybe?
I think probably there is going to be some reaction. I mean, Donald Trump has been so strong; he's really quieted things down. And but now I think before too long, we're going to start to see the Democrats be more aggressive. We're going to start to see the American public start to react some. So, I mean, the real question is, can something happen short term, or will we wait till the next election? The other thing I would like to point out is that the tragedy of all of this is that actually the U.S. economy was going pretty well before this. There wasn't really such a need to panic. And finally, it's important to point out that even if they get this manufacturing back to the U.S., now a lot of it is automated, so you won't create all of these jobs that you're thinking to do. And just one final thing, that is that, the Trump administration is saying we're going to raise all sorts of revenue from these tariffs, and we're also going to bring lots of companies to the U.S. Clearly, you can only do one of these two things, but not both for a given company that you're moving to the U.S. or keeping abroad. And so this is really false advertising that not everyone has picked up on yet.
Well, the sad thing is however much we can talk, it's on deaf ears, right, at the White House, and at the people who believe unconditionally that they are doing the right thing. Anyway, we have to leave it there. Many thanks to my guests, Victor Gao, Carl Fei, and Warwick Powell. Thank you for sharing with us your insights. And with that, we come to the end of this edition of The Point with me, Li Xin. As always, you can follow me on Facebook and X using the handle Li Xin in Beijing. On behalf of the whole team, thank you for watching. You've got the point.